Mr. President!
If you asked anyone in the early 2000s, what is the worst superhero film of all time? They'd probably tell you 1990's Captain America. This was a dirt cheap film where the hero was pretty much a loser the entire time, there was very little action, and oh man, that suit, it looks so dumb! But what if I told you there was a good version of that film?
Thanks.
So recently, someone sent me a different cut of Albert Pyun's Captain America. They sent this to me mostly because I wrote a book on Albert Pyun, and I am a huge fan. But even I would say that his version of Captain America, while there's fun to be found, it is definitely a difficult production, if you will. So I sat down to watch this new cut, and I could not believe my eyes. It is radically different from the version that we have seen since its release. This new version is what Albert himself cut before the studio took it away and completely changed it into what we can watch right now everywhere. But before I get into that, I need to talk about Albert Pyun a little bit, because Albert Pyun is a director that I clearly, having written the book, have been very passionate about. But I need you to understand who he is a little bit before I jump into why this cut is as good as it is. So Albert is a guy that grew up in Hawaii. He had no film connections. He just wanted to make movies. So with a bunch of his friends, they did a bunch of scripts and storyboards, and they went to LA wanting to do anything to get their visions up on screen. And Albert somehow was able to do that. He directed and wrote a film called Sword and the Sorcerer that shockingly was very successful. But the producer claimed all the credit. He said, oh, Albert, he didn't know what he was doing. I had to take over. The cinematographer said that he basically directed the film. So Albert, with a big success to his name, had to struggle again and make a second feature film from a bunch of different sources. This time, Radioactive Dreams is one of the weirdest films you've ever seen. It's a post-apocalyptic Mad Max style film, but it stars two guys that think they're in a 40s noir gumshoe film because they grew up in a nuclear bunker reading nothing but detective novels. Also, did I mention it's basically an 80s rock opera? Yep, that's right. The whole soundtrack of Radioactive Dreams is filled with just amazing songs by women vocalists that you have never heard of before. But Albert, he was so passionate about this stuff that he was able to get it all together, put up his vision on screen.
Guilty pleasures, standing just outside my door.
Now, Radioactive Dreams was also a very troubled production, but Albert was able to get it out there and then move on to the next thing. And this is kind of the core to Albert Pyun, is that he loved making movies and he was very passionate about all the movies that he made. Sure, he took on jobs that were just kind of like work for hire, but he never gave it any less than his 100%. And so after doing a bunch of independent productions, some of them that fell apart in the middle of production and he still had to crawl across the finish line, he ended up at Cannon Films. Now, Cannon Films, as you may know, is a company that is infamous for giving us people like Chuck Norris. And Albert kind of got there right when they were on their last legs, but he was the guy that was willing to do anything and was super passionate about it. He was going to make a Spider-Man film where they would shoot the first half with a skinny Peter Parker, and then they would take a break, the guy would bulk up, and then they would go back and shoot the rest of the movie with a more muscular Spider-Man. He was going to make a sequel to He-Man Master of the Universe, basically in that period. These were all ideas that Albert had, and unfortunately, a lot of them just didn't come to fruition. And because he was a guy that was willing to take on any job, you get a lot of stuff like his version of Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is not good, but is basically something he took on because he said, all right, I can finish this really quickly and get it out the door. And if I do this, will you give me more opportunities to do the things that I feel passionate about with the resources I need to get them done? Albert made a little film called Cyborg, the Jean-Claude Van Damme picture. Now, this is one that I think that if people aren't thinking of Captain America, they're probably thinking of Cyborg when it comes to Albert Pyun. This kind of post-apocalyptic, it's got some beautiful images, it's corny, it's got a real bad synth score, but if you grew up with it, you probably have a lot of nostalgia to it. But Albert being Albert, he always approached things with a very specific vision that the producers didn't always agree with. So, for example, with Cyborg, his vision was a black and white, post-apocalyptic, expressionist action-adventure film with a almost like gloom metal soundtrack throughout. And he did that, and he presented it to the producers.
Look around you. There is no joy, no hope, only cold, empty despair.
And they went, what the hell is this? Supposedly the first screening of Cyborg in the like black and white freaked out the producers so much that like they rushed out, took it away from Albert. One of Jean-Claude Van Damme's friends, Sheldon Lettich, actually called up JCVD and was like, you gotta get in here. This film is a disaster and you need to come and re-edit it. And that's the re-edited version is basically the version that most people have seen, but the Cyborg version under the title Slinger, which is what Albert Pyun preferred, can be seen out in the world if you go looking for it. It's kind of in shambles, it doesn't look so good, but you get an idea of what his vision was, and it was very particular, and most importantly, it was interesting. Captain America was a film that Albert took on because he loved the script. He thought that it captured a kind of idea of Captain America that he really appreciated, and that there was like sadness there that you wouldn't usually see in superhero films. I mean, there had been two kind of like TV movie-ish Captain America adaptations before. Now Albert wanted to bring kind of his perspective, his love of comic books, because he loved this character. That's the thing about Albert, is that like all the like weird stuff that he was doing was stuff that now has kind of been normalized. Like he loved anime, he loved manga, he loved Hong Kong action movies, when nobody was doing this, and he wanted to bring it to the screen, but he was working with basically people who are like, you don't know what you're doing, let us do it in this very formulaic way, and then we can get it out, we can make some money. So Captain America, he takes on the job, he's about to shoot it, finally, he can do his vision. He's been, being experimental with stuff like Cyborg and also Alien from LA, but now he's gonna do something straight down the line for 20th Century, which was Golan of the Golan and Globus of Canon Films. And then right before they start shooting, bam, the budget is slashed to almost nothing. Basically like almost not enough money to make a movie. But Albert, he's always this way when you read stories of how he would approach productions. Anybody else would have just like given up. But Albert, he pressed on. He made a movie, he fought with like one of the producers on set every single day. He had so much trouble shooting in the locales where they were. Basically, he said that his friend, the line producer, who had produced almost all of his films early on and is now actually producing all of Rian Johnson's pictures, including The Last Jedi, thanks to him showing up with like briefcases full of cash, they were able to get through the production and get something that was done. And Albert sat down and he edited the film and he handed it into the studio, and the producers went, what the hell is this? They took it away from him, recut it, and put it out in the theaters where it tanked. Everybody hated it. And then Albert had said that he feels like Captain America weighed on him his entire career. That it was something that people associated with him and kind of started the slide into lower and lower and lower budget films. Now, I would say some of Albert's best films, for example, Nemesis, came after Captain America, but it's undeniable that the kind of lambasting it took, the jokery of it all, killed his career in some ways. And the only reason he kept making movies is because he couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't following his dream of being a filmmaker. Which finally brings us to the version of Captain America that I watched. Now, there was a director's cut that was released by Albert Pyun in around 2011, and this version is basically the movie that most people have seen with a few deleted scenes inserted into the picture. At this point in 2011, I think Albert had kind of forgotten what he had done originally with Captain America. There were some thoughts in his mind, like he remembered the ending, which he was very passionate about, but the structural thing, the kind of radicalness about his version is something he had completely forgotten. And I was able to see it because when Albert finished the movie and he presented it to the producers, they said, absolutely not. And they made him a deal. They said, hey, you can have your version of the movie and we'll release your version of the movie. But first we're going to do our cut and we'll put it out. But here's a print for you so you know that you have it, and we will come and get it later and we can work on it some more. The film tanks? That never happens. Albert has this print. He supposedly had this print until the day he died. His wife said he would bring this big, heavy collection of canisters everywhere that they went. It was the first thing he grabbed when they moved. If they were out in a tent for a while, living out of it, he would bring those canisters. If they were on a long road trip, he'd grab those canisters, put them in the back of the truck. People knew it as the Captain America canisters, that it was his cut of the movie. But probably most people assumed it was fairly similar to the version that went out in the world. But Albert was very, dedicated to this, and he really wanted it to get out there. So eventually, it got scanned, and that's what I saw. And when I sat down to watch it, I went, I've seen the director's cut. I know how this goes. I mean, it's nice to see a new scan of the film. The colors look really nice, not in that like blown out way that they're in the theatrical version. But then within 10 seconds, I went, wait a minute. This is different. Because the film doesn't start where it does in the theatrical version. So the original cut of the film starts with a young boy in DC in the 40s who witnesses Captain America fighting a gigantic missile bomb as it floats through Washington, D.C. And then he takes a photo of it, and then it cuts to Alaska where, boom, the missile hits, and Captain America is frozen for decades. So right there, the structure of the film is completely different, because in the theatrical version, you get the whole story in chronological order. So you get the Red Skull's origin, you get Captain America's origin, like him at home, him being tested, him doing his first mission, him failing miserably, him being frozen. But in the original cut of the film, all the flashbacks are presented non-linearly throughout the film, where characters will think of something and it will cut away to that moment.
You can travel cheaply as one, you sick bastard.
It creates a much, much better flow to the entire film. Because if you didn't shoot the movie to have all of it run chronologically, which I believe they weren't intending to do it that way, then it creates a real lopsided effect. I mean, like, one of the biggest complaints is the Red Skull has amazing makeup in the first 30 minutes of the film, the parts that are taking place during World War II. But then it just goes away and he has more of like a Dick Tracy makeup. But thanks to this flashback structure, you get to see that Red Skull makeup throughout the film because you keep cutting back to this big fight where Captain America lost. And another thing about the movie is that, like, he loses on his first mission. He is a huge loser, and it feels kind of like a joke and that the filmmakers didn't know what they were doing. But what if I were to tell you, they absolutely knew what they were doing. They wanted it to be about a hero that loses, and how do you find the strengths to keep going? You don't really get that in the theatrical cut. Maybe if you squint, you can see a little bit of it, but in this, it is completely underlined. Steve Rogers is living in the shadow of his father, and he wants to be a hero in the way that he feels he needs to be, but he doesn't succeed. And then he wakes up, a stranger in a strange land in the present, and he struggles with, okay, what am I supposed to do now? He even meets an old superior who is completely disillusioned, who's like, what is the point of war? World War II, we had a villain, we knew who we were fighting, but since then, the bodies just pile up. And Matt Salinger, who stars in the film, like, his performance in this original cut really gets to breathe. And he still has that kind of like goofy, aw shucks look to it all. But that's the point. He is Captain America. But in the other version, where they tried to make a wham bam action film out of something that was never really meant to be that, you don't get that kind of sense of loss and weight that you get in this original cut. I also want to say that if you hate the original version, that you think the costume is dumb, or that there's not enough action, you're probably not going to like this version. There's not any more action scenes. If anything, it's longer than the other version, and that the costume with its rubber ears still is there. There's nothing changed there. But it's all about a sense of flow and tone that is completely different in the original cut versus the theatrical version. Like, you can tell Albert and the screenwriters had a take on Captain America in this film, and that when it was recut and tried to make into something that it was not, it doesn't work. But in his version, in my opinion, it does work, and you get the sense of what he's trying to do, which includes more stuff with the Red Skull. Now, the Red Skull in the 1990s version of Captain America, he's a joke because he's Italian and he wears that goofy Dick Tracy makeup throughout the majority of the film. Now, the Italian thing is something that was imposed upon the movie by the producers, probably because there was like German financing involved, I'm sure. And so it does feel a little goofy, but In the original cut, Albert wanted to kind of compare and contrast the Red Skull and Captain America in the sense that they basically have the same origins. And because there's flashbacks throughout, they get to run concurrently with each other. And you can understand that they're two people that went through the same, horrible thing. Captain America willingly, the Red Skull unwillingly, and they both ended on two different points of the moral spectrum. But by having these extra scenes with the Red Skull, you get a more kind of like weightiness, a sad... I mean, he's still a villain. He does horrifying things in the movie, including this original cut, something more horrible than he does ever in the theatrical version. But at the same time, it creates a weightiness to his character that completely, in my opinion, makes the new ending work. The film, it follows the same structure as the theatrical version, just differently. Like, Captain America kind of wakes up, doesn't know what's going on, and we're slowly filled in the gaps as he goes. There's way more scenes with his girlfriend, who is now elderly. This kind of like, look, I'm old now, and you're an impossibility. We cannot continue like this, but I will support you throughout. None of that is in the theatrical cut. You also get more interactions with his girlfriend's daughter, which again is always something weird about the whole Captain America story. It's still present here, still a little bit more fleshed out. You also get Captain America more aimless in the original cut. He gets a job at Gold's Gym, which leads to a very heartbreaking scene where like he realizes, oh man, I've missed out completely on everything.
Something happened while I was away, didn't it?
Welcome home, Captain America.
As well, you get less plot in the climax. When it finally kind of like kicks into being a Captain America picture, when they go to Italy at the end and they're like fighting castles and stuff like that, there's actually a little bit less of the adventuring and kind of mystery solving to make way for the ending in Albert Pyun's original cut. But before I get to that, I need to mention something else that completely changes this version. So on these kind of like Golan produced films that Albert made, Cyborg and Captain America, I believe he had scores that were done by Tony Reappraising, who is his guy, who's done scores for all of his films. I think he's an amazing composer. I mean, they worked together at first on Radioactive Dreams because Tony was part of a band with Sue Sad, and so a song was in there, and then they started collaborating, and Tony basically did the scores of all of Albert Pyun's films, and they're amazing. They're like electronic. He's like a one-man band, but he's finding different themes and tones for every movie, but it's not what they wanted for a superhero film. So the score in this original cut, I believe it's a temp track with some original stuff meant for the film throughout. But from what I can tell, and speaking to the person who sent me it, we believe Tony did do most of the score because it's kind of like low, almost moody electronic music throughout, and it completely changes the vibe of the movie, where before you hear this very kind of chintzy MIDI score trying to be like, oh look, superheroes, right? Isn't it fun?
Where did you say that launch site was?
Here, it's underlining the sadness of it all, and that kind of even extends to the fight scenes.
Get down!
Because I don't think it's done, the version that I saw. It's like 80% there, but there's some stuff that feels not mixed, some stuff that may be a little bit slack, but there's opening and ending credits on the film. So like this is a version that Albert, I feel, was happy with. He just needed the go-ahead to kind of like polish it before it could go out into the world. And yeah, so like this music makes such a huge difference. I mean, like just look at this clip, this montage, and how different both versions feel. Now, I don't know if the music would have been exactly that if he had had his way and he had been able to put the movie in the world, but it would have been close to that. And it is just radically a different movie because of that. Like, the edits are actually not that different in most scenes, because I think that when it was handed off, they didn't want to have to re-edit it all. So like, they would just move it around, sometimes very sloppily, or just cut in the middle of a scene, a huge chunk of dialogue, and just so we can get it moving as quickly as possible. But by doing that, they just completely destroyed the film and all the intents of the creators. Which leads us to the finale of the picture with the Red Skull. So if you remember the ending of the film, the Red Skull at the end, he like goes up some stairs outside where there's a big piano and he does his big speech and he has a bomb, and, you know, Captain America throws his shield, knocks the Red Skull over, and then like looks in the camera, and none of that is in the original cut of Albert Pyun's. So at the end of the movie, Albert does such a brilliant thing where he's intercutting the first fight the Red Skull and Captain America had, where Captain America lost, and the new version. So you get like a sense of both vibes, and it almost feels like Captain America's memories of the first fight are propelling him to defeat the Red Skull here. And eventually he does, and the Red Skull walks up to that piano at the top of the stairs. And then he does something that's built up throughout the movie with the use of flashbacks, really underlining it. But instead of going with a big, like, I have the bomb and how can you defeat me, Captain America? It ends on like a truly emotional note just for the villain. And what's wild is, like, if I explained it to you, you'd be like, that sounds a little goofy, but it's not. It like genuinely works within the context of the movie. And this is the thing that Albert remembered. He remembered this ending, and he wanted it to be back in the movie so bad, but it never happened. Albert carried those cans with him his entire life. And near the end, one of his friends told me that he would have episodes where he would talk about, you know, his past, the mistakes he felt he made. And one thing that haunted him the most was Captain America. He just wanted people to know that he loved the character and he had done as best as he could with the resources that were presented. But no one ever got to see that. And if only they could get the movie off of those cans in front of someone's eyes, maybe people would understand. But unfortunately, they believe that the Force reel was damaged and could not be scanned. And so it kept being put off till finally his wife, as Albert was incredibly sick, decided, all right, I'm going to get this scan. We're going to get this out there. We can fix this wrong and make it right. Albert passed away before he could see the scan of the movie. To see what his original intent was, that you felt that he had forgotten over the decades. He remembered the ending, but he didn't remember he had done such a great job with everything else. Now, it has its flaws, but it works. The film now is scanned. People have seen it, but not enough. I can't give you the movie. I know the people who are in charge of it. They are doing their best to get it out there to as many people as possible. It probably needs to be cleaned up. Some of the music will have to be changed, but it exists. It's out there. And I just want to let people know that there is a good version of Captain America. That Albert Pyun was a great director who was passionate and creative in a way that almost nobody was during the time that he was making movies. People online always used to call Albert Pyun the worst filmmaker working in the 90s. That he was like the Ed Wood of the straight-to-video era. And that is absolutely wrong. No one was doing what Albert Pyun was doing, with nothing, continually making movies. Doing an impossible task like Captain America with no money. Some of the action shots in Captain America, Albert paid out of his own pocket to get just a complete movie. And they ripped it out of his hands, they recut it, they put it out there, and it completely destroyed his name as a filmmaker. But now, there's a better version of the movie out there. A lot of Albert Pyun's films can be watched and seen for what they really are, which are like great pieces of genre entertainment from everybody on set working as hard as they could. Because if you listen to anyone who worked with Albert Pyun, they will tell you the same thing. They never worked with somebody more energetic who believed in what they were making than Albert. So I hope if you take anything from this, is that you just want to see this version of the movie. It's going to get out there eventually. Right now, it's kind of in that, middle phase, but I feel like in the next year, it'll be everywhere and you'll be able to watch it. And just remember it and make sure to pick it up and to give it a chance. Not to laugh at it, but to actually see the intent and the art that went into making something like that. And go and watch Albert's other films. They have never been more available. I would recommend like Nemesis, Sword and the Sorcerer, Radioactive Dreams, which unfortunately does not have any good-looking version at this particular moment in time due to rights issues, but you can just go on YouTube right now and there's a version right there and it will give you enough of it to become an Albert Pyun fan, which I hope that's what you get out of this. Again, my name's been Justin DeClue. You can read the book I wrote on Albert Pyun. Basically, it's me going through every one of his pictures and talking about them in a very frank and honest way. You can also listen to me every week on the Important Cinema Club, where we just talk about a filmmaker every week, and it's about like an introductory lesson to that filmmaker. You don't need to do any homework. You just have to spend 25 minutes to us talking about a filmmaker, most of the time trying to sell them to you, and hopefully to challenge you and want you to see more stuff. Thank you very much for watching this, and I will see you in the next video.
It seems the Americans have made a poor choice for their champion. Pity him! He is like a child!
I'm not gonna blow it this time.